right, welcome everyone. And thank you so much for joining us here for the webinar launch of the adapted Make Me a Change Agent training manual for WASH, agriculture, and livelihoods activities. My name is Abby Love, and I'm an agriculture advisor at Mercy Corps working on the SCALE Award. And together with my colleagues at ProWASH, we are co-hosting this webinar and really looking forward to the discussion to follow. Next slide. So the webinar will be approximately 90 minutes, and as many of you have been doing, please continue to use the chat box to share experiences and ask questions throughout the webinar. We will be looking through those and trying to answer them as they come up, but also can save them for later and get back to you. We ask that you mute your microphone and turn off your cameras at this point if you're not speaking. And then later we'll be in breakout groups where you'll be able to turn on your mic and your video to engage more with participants. We will also be recording the webinar and sending it and presentations out after with additional Make Me a Change Agent resources. Next slide. I'm joined by a great team of presenters here today. We have Miraz Rahman, who leads the Collaboration, Learning, and Adaptation team for the Sapling program in Bangladesh. We have Brian Bacon, who is the Acting Office Director for the Office of Technical and Program Quality at the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance at USAID, and Nicole Weber, who's the Capacity Strengthening and Learning Senior Specialist for ProWASH working at Save the Children. We had also hoped to have Moga Badassa here with us today from Food for the Hungry Ethiopia. Unfortunately, he is unable to attend, but want to thank him for his contributions to the work to date. Our agenda for today, we'll have a welcome from Brian Bacon from the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, and then move into an introduction to the Make Me a Change Agent guide, the adaptation process that SCALE and ProWASH went through the past year to adapt the guide from the original, what's different from the original guide, and then any lessons learned and kind of key results we've had from piloting this and adapting the guide over the past year and a half. We'll give you kind of a sneak peek into the guide, walk you through how each lesson is laid out, and then we'll have Miraz give us an introduction to the negotiated behavior change lesson. We'll have some breakout groups so you can sit with the content and think about how it applies to your work. And then we'll close with some next steps. So now we'll get started with a word from Brian Bacon, who's the Acting Office Director for the Office of Technical and Program Quality, or TPQ, for the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance at USAID. He has over 25 years of experience supporting development and humanitarian initiatives worldwide, and almost 2 decades with USAID. At TPQ, he is responsible for ensuring high quality programmatic and technical leadership, oversight, and guidance across all dimensions of BHA. And with that, I'll pass it over to Brian to say a word of welcome.
Thank you very much, Abby. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's great to be here virtually with you today and see so much interest in this topic. As Abby shared, my name is Brian Bacon. I'm the Acting Director of the Office of Technical and Program Quality in USAID's newly formed Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, or BHA. To start, I'd like to share a little bit about BHA. As many of you are aware, this new USAID Bureau brings together all the resources and expertise of what were USAID's Office of Food for Peace, FFP, and Office of U.S. Foreign Disaster Assistance, OFDA, creating one USAID Bureau and the U.S. government lead for global humanitarian assistance. We're confident that combining our humanitarian resources and capabilities will increase our influence and effectiveness and create a strong, cohesive platform for linking humanitarian and development assistance. We view this as an exciting change that has been literally years in the making. Our USAID staff and partners are working to make this transformation and the new Bureau as successful as possible in meeting our goal to provide life-saving humanitarian assistance, including food, water, shelter, emergency healthcare, sanitation, hygiene, and critical nutrition services to the world's most vulnerable and hardest to reach people. Amidst this period of change, our top priority will be to ensure the continuity of operations and continue to maintain and improve the technical quality of the work that we carry out with our partners, many of which are represented here today on the call. The new BHA office that I currently lead, TPQ, Office of Technical and Program Quality, brings together the specialized expertise of the former Food for Peace and OFDA into one coordinated structure, uniting us in our vision to enhance the quality and impact of our programs. And this is really the reason why we are here today. It shouldn't be a surprise that BHA will continue to provide ongoing technical, programmatic, and learning support to its partners through specific technically focused activities in a variety of areas that promote food security and self-reliance. Pro-Wash and Scale represent two very important activities along these lines, originally developed in Food for Peace in 2018. As many of you are aware, Pro-Wash, which is an abbreviation for Practices, Operations, and Research in Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene, is focused on improving the quality and impact of WASH programming for our BHA partners and for our beneficiary communities. Scale, Strengthening Capacity in Agriculture, Livelihoods, and Environment, has a similar goal with technical focus on agriculture, natural resource management, and alternative livelihoods. Both Scale and Pro-Wash provide knowledge sharing and learning, applied research expertise, and capacity building support to BHA implementing partners in their respective technical areas. They're also part of the broader community of practice that identify evidence-based solutions in food security programming. Recognizing the linkages between WASH and agriculture, NRM, and livelihoods issues, Pro-Wash and Scale collaborate closely together on a number of activities. An example of this collaboration is the Make Me a Change Agent training package that is being launched today. This package results from discussions with BHA implementers identifying the need to support and strengthen our frontline staff capacity to facilitate behavior change in the most vulnerable communities where they work. Over the last year and a half, Pro-Wash and Scale have worked together to adapt the material, pilot them with over 200 WASH, agriculture, and livelihoods implementer staff in 4 countries to test, refine, and develop new content. The goal of this webinar is to share key objectives of the Make Me a Change Agent training manual, the results from its initial rollout, and the lessons learned. BHA partners today will learn how these skills have been used in the field and explore how they might use this content and related lessons learned in their own programs to support and sustain behavior change. In light of COVID-19, we also recognize the need to be agile and adaptive in how programs are implemented. Negotiating behavior change is an important tool as we face unprecedented challenges and promote new behaviors such as wearing masks and social distancing as technical activity outcomes. So with that, thank you all for attending today. We really look forward to the presentation and discussion stemming from the presentation, and especially look forward to working with you as part of the new Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance. And with that, to Abby.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian, for that great introduction to BHA and also to Scale and Pro-Wash and the Make Me a Change Agent manual and the webinar today. Did a great job of summarizing why we're here, why these skills are important, and what we're hoping to get out of the webinar today. So thanks so much for that. Next slide, Julia. Okay, so now I want to take a moment to get a sense of who's joined us today. So we're going to do a little activity using something called Mentimeter. So on your browser, whether it's on your computer or your phone, ask that you go to menti.com. And when you go to that screen, it will ask you to enter a code. And so the code we're entering is 944851. And Nicole just posted in the chat box the link as well. And then when you get there, you'll see a question about which sector you primarily work in. And Julia, I think you're going to share the results as they start coming in. Is that right? Great. So we can see as these are coming in that we have a number of folks from agriculture, livelihoods, NRM, as well as wash, sanitation, and hygiene. This is great to see since that's part of our target audience for this webinar. Also quite a few from social and behavior change, health and nutrition. Great. This is really encouraging to see and hope that our colleagues during the breakout sessions, you're able to connect with others working in your sectors and across sectors, because this guide really is meant to be multi-sectoral. Great, okay, we'll go on to the next question, which is about, have you been trained in or used the original or adapted Make Me a Change Agent guide? So there was the original guide that was put out in 2015 by the TOPS program. And in the registration, some of you said maybe or weren't sure, but most of you, as we're seeing here coming into the screen, are unfamiliar with the content, or is the first time that you're really engaging with the Make Me a Change Agent guide. So it's great that you're joining this webinar to learn more about it, and hopefully you'll leave today having a good understanding of what's in there. Great, okay, we'll go on to our third question, which is just, what do you hope to learn today? So you can take, just a sentence or a few words that kind of summarize what you're hoping to get out of this webinar and learn when you leave the webinar today. How the manual can be used, how to be a change agent, better approaches for field interventions, SBC tactics, tools, how we can use SBC skills to improve agriculture programming, how to use the resource effectively in my community, see what's new or different about the manual from when it was previously used, how to tie together livelihoods and WASH. Great, it's really good to see that there's a lot of questions around how this manual can be used, what's different about it from the previous manual, and then the kind of WASH and agriculture intersections as well. So we will do our best to address a number of these points today. We may not get to all of them. Also in the registration form, there were a number of questions similarly to these. So if we can't get them to these questions in our webinar today, we're going to give you our contact information and would love to continue the discussions with you thereafter. So thanks so much for participating. Hopefully we've got a better sense of kind of who's in the room, which sectors we're coming from, and kind of what we're hoping to get out of the webinar today. So with that, I'll pass it over to Nicole from ProWash, who will take us into the next section.
Great, thank you so much, Abby, and really exciting to see a wide representation from different organizations and countries, and have seen a lot of partners that are calling in that are funded by BHA. So before we jump into what this current guide contains, we wanted to give you a bit more information about the history of the guide. I noticed on Menti that one person or several people were really interested in learning about, what's different with this adaptation, and we'll be covering that in the next few minutes. So just a little bit of background. Under USAID Food for Peace funding, the TOPS program led the development of a Make Me a Change Agent training manual, which was published in 2015. This is really developed out of an understanding that staff often work as community health development workers. They receive quite a bit of technical training on specific skill sets, such as managing malnutrition or latrine construction, or how to undertake community-led total sanitation. But they don't receive a lot of training and support around how to facilitate this development work in changing communities. And so this original guide was comprised of quite a few chapters written by different social and behavior change and community health experts. This original guide really had a lot of extensive input and support from the core group, Social and Behavior Change Working Group, and the Food Security Working Group. Many of you know Mary DeCoster, who headed this work up under TOPS. And during that time, this guide was also pre-tested in a number of countries and revised based on participant and facilitator feedback. Next slide. So early on in the ProWash and Scale Awards, we increasingly heard from partners the challenge they face when supporting behavior change, whether that be around hand washing, composting, using improved seeds, latrine construction. I think all of us who work in water and sanitation and hygiene really see a challenge around behavior change and also sustaining these changes, right? How many times has a community been certified as open defecation free, but then afterwards there's relapse, in behavior. And so we heard this from partners, everything around, paying for water, composting, using improved seeds, that it's just behavior change is one of the main challenges we face in our day-to-day work. So this, along with findings from the USAID Commission FANTA report on social and behavior change in the development food security activities, really highlighted the need for capacity strengthening and support on effective approaches to social and behavior change, and also on participatory adult education techniques. Years and years of experience with capacity strengthening and learning, we know that adults learn best when, the training is engaging, when they have an opportunity to share their own experiences, when we recognize that people come to, to a training or to an activity already with a lot of knowledge around these behaviors. And so by using these participatory approaches, you can really leverage and facilitate change. So this, along with a direct request from a partner during a Democratic Republic of Congo engagement workshop with partners, encouraged us to undertake the adaptation of this manual. So first we took the guide and we added in concrete, wash, and agriculture specific examples, role plays, and stories. We also then added in specific lessons to design this to be as a training of trainers. And we reviewed training reports that were produced under TOPS to see lessons learned and how we could complement the existing training manual. Then prior to piloting the training, we held meetings with managers and conducted a learning needs and resource assessment with participants to really understand their expectations and what they wanted to get out of this training. And so this informed the agenda for each training that was conducted in DRC, Uganda, Bangladesh, and Ethiopia. And based on the feedback and requests from the first pilots in DRC and Uganda, we worked with a gender and social inclusion specialist to add in lessons on household decision-making, roles, and responsibilities. And we really leveraged all of this pilot testing to really refine and revise the adapted guide. So for example, based on feedback from the trainings in DRC, we added in a lesson and an exercise around stages of change, recognizing that when working with a community, people are already at different stages of change when it comes to specific behavior. So for example, if we think about household water treatment, some people already treat their water, perhaps in the community, some haven't started doing that behavior. And so by understanding these differences, we can show more respect towards communities and also leverage these previous experiences. We also added more participatory exercises in the facilitation lesson based on feedback so that participants could try out new approaches in this safe training environment. such as 1-2-4 brainstorming. So then we had, after piloting it in several trainings, we had reviewers from the core group, social and behavior change working group, the original editor, Mary DeCoster, authors, and USAID provide review. And so we've recently finalized this guide and posted it along with tips for using the manual during COVID-19. And Abby will drop the link into the box of this short tip sheet. The guide is also undergoing final translation into French and Amharic and will be available in both these languages in the next month or so. So while we recognize that, the context has really changed since we pilot tested this training in face-to-face trainings over the past year, we recognize that, these competencies are even more important during COVID-19 when it comes to strong communication, when it comes to addressing myths and misinformation, negotiating new behaviors such as mask wearing and physical distancing. And so we really see this guide as, still being very relevant, even though the global context has changed. And it's just a question of adapting some of the techniques to make sure that you're respecting things such as social distancing. So great, next slide. So if you're familiar with the original guide, you'll note that many of the original lessons are still included in the adapted guide. And they now include these WASH and agriculture specific examples, stories, and role plays. For example, how might you use negotiation during a community-led total sanitation session? Or how would storytelling be used to address issues around water resource management and conflict, or to encourage a farmer to purchase and use quality seeds? Throughout the manual and in this webinar, you might hear us use the term behavior change agent, or BCA. And this refers to a wide variety of roles held by workers who promote change. So if you're doing this training, you might want to replace BCA with a title that is most appropriate for your audience. So for example, if I'm training a group of hygiene promoters throughout the manual, I could change the term BCA or behavior change agent to hygiene promoter. If I'm training a group of agriculture extension agents, I can change it to that term. But here the key is really that, through our work as humanitarians, as development workers, our number one goal is kind of facilitating and supporting behavior change for, improved quality of life. Next slide. In addition to adapting a number of lessons, we also created several new lessons. This is in part to create this into a training of trainers package. And we recognize that a cascade model would allow trained staff to reach a wider audience of field staff and volunteers. These additional lessons included action planning. So how can you take what you learned during this training and apply it to your work and/or to train others on these competencies? We also recognize that lesson planning in itself is another skill, especially if you are turning a training of trainers you attended into shorter training bits for community workers, natural leaders, agricultural extension agents. So we added a lesson on planning to facilitate and train others. And so we drew heavily from other resources that are available on adult education. In addition, we heard from participants during this piloting on what else they would like to see in this manual. And early on, it became very evident that there was interest in, an introduction to social and behavior change, on how to integrate gender into WASH and agricultural livelihood activities, and that many of the challenges around behavior change within these sectors also came down to concerns around household decision-making and household roles and responsibilities. So based on partner and participant input, and hearing from them the challenges that they face in the different field sites on WASH and agriculture and livelihood behaviors, we adapted these lessons. And so later on in today's webinar, Miraz will share a bit more about what the guide looks like and some of the content. So now we're going to share just a short video from the Noba Jatra activity in Bangladesh as an example of how they have used one of these lessons on quality improvement and verification checklists during COVID-19 and agricultural activities.
প্লটে উনি আজকে বেনিফিশিয়ারিদের আমাদেরকে আজকে বস্তা পদ্ধতি করে দেখাচ্ছেন। বস্তা পদ্ধতি এখানে আমি মাঝখানে খা দেব, দিয়ে তারপর আমি মালকিং করে দেব। আচ্ছা, এখানে খা দিলে কি উপকার হবে? খা দিলে এই যে পানিটা আমি ওই সাইডে না দিয়ে ওই খড় কম খরচ হবে। আর জিনাপা আমাদের মালচিং করে দিচ্ছেন, মালচিং এর কি সুবিধা হবে? মালচিং এর কম লাগে, মাটিটার আর্দ্রতা ধরে রাখবে এবং আপনার ফসলের এটা ভালো হবে।
Great, thank you so much, Julia. So that was just a short video from the Noba Jatra project in Bangladesh, and you can see how they were using a quality improvement verification checklist. So we have two lessons in the manual around quality improvement verification checklists, one on how to use them and how to use them to really motivate and encourage staff, and how to provide constructive feedback, using these checklists to really improve the quality of your program. So much of our time on monitoring, we're looking at different program indicators, but a lot of the work we do really rely on staff having these strong facilitation, communication, and negotiation skills. And this quality improvement tool is really helping facilitators to strengthen those skills, whether it's a hygiene promoter or an agriculture extension officer. So in that example, the supervisor would observe an activity, and then after the activity would go off to the side and have a dialogue with the facilitator on how, what they thought went well in that activity, what were some things that they felt they were strong at as a facilitator, and how can they improve their facilitation techniques. And then the supervisor provides feedback to the facilitator, and together they agree on some things that they'll improve over time. And so in the guide, there's examples of these checklists that you can use, but there's also a lesson on how to create your own, and so you can create specific ones for different activities that you might be doing. So thank you so much, Noba Jatra, for sharing that video, and is also was an example of how, even though things have changed with COVID-19, a lot of these skills and lessons can still be used. Next slide. Great. So throughout this piloting process, we really identified a number of lessons learned for future trainings. So first of all, work with managers for action planning. We really found that it was important from the start to take time up front to really understand from participants and from managers what the expectations are for the next step. So with a training of trainers, you're expected to train others, but what will that look like? How has that been built into the development food security activity, into the project? Who will train who and when? And will they be training others on the full module or just a subsection of it? We also recognized the importance of spending time on who should attend the training and which lessons are going to be most helpful for your staff. If quality improvement verification checklists are something that you as a manager plan to use in your project, then that's a great use of time during the training to work on those skills. But if that's not something you're going to do, then let's skip that lesson and spend more time on those fundamental communication and facilitation skills. Another challenge and kind of lesson learned for us was that we heard from a manager during follow-up interviews that you want all of your field staff to attend, and it's very difficult to make this selection. Our job is really about making changes in the community, And that's not a skill you want to give to only some staff and not to others. And so when we heard this from the manager, I really emphasized that importance of having an action plan from the beginning. If 30 staff are going to be trained and you have 100 staff on your project, what's the plan from the start to make sure that those skills are cascaded out to the rest of the team? Our second lesson learned was really the importance of leveraging national and regional trainers. And we're really excited to have Miraz with us today, who is one of those trainers. We worked with an incredible group across the different trainings who were able to contextualize the training content, provide, context-specific examples, working in different languages, and really are strong trainers that are still available in the regions as a resource for future trainings. Our next learning was that it's important to include a practical field component. Over the first few trainings, we really heard from participants that they wanted a field exercise included in the training so that they could practice these skills in real time and receive facilitator feedback on the skills. We then piloted this in Ethiopia and really received positive feedback on that session. We heard from participants, that even though in the training, it seems like there's a lot of time to practice, you have a lot of role plays, you're doing different scenarios, just going out to actually the community where they work and applying those skills in, a situation that's similar to their day-to-day work helped really solidify the content in their head. And then afterwards, right after that field testing, having the time to talk to the facilitator, to discuss with other participants some of the barriers and challenges or things that were different than what they expected, as well as some of the benefits of using these skills was really helpful. Post-training monitoring, so at 3 months after each training, we conducted a survey with participants to better understand barriers to using the Make Me a Change Agent skills, who they're training, and some of the facilitators and the things that made it easy for them to train others. And then at 6 months, we did interviews with managers to help us understand, their experiences as a manager from that training, as well as to discuss and to think about ways to help the participants overcome the barriers they identified. So given the number of participants who requested additional training on Make Me a Change Agent during the post-training monitoring, we're now exploring an option to develop a remote learning course to also help participants overcome some of those barriers we identified through that post-training monitoring. And then I think there's many lessons and actually we have a document that's available on the FSN network that compiles the results from the post-training monitoring as well as these lessons learned. But I just want to touch on one more today, and that's the limitation of the training of trainers approach. So we found through the training, some people already had a bit of a background in social and behavior change or in adult education techniques. And after this 5-day training, they're ready to go out and train others. Some, would need an additional follow-up and coaching, as well as field-based learning. And so we find that, with this training of trainers approach, it's really about balance. It's fantastic to have trainers that are able to go out and cascade the training, but they still need this additional follow-up and coaching and troubleshooting, at least during, at the beginning of training others. Next slide. So at the end of each training session, and we've held 8 so far, we did daily facilitator debriefings, and end of training participant evaluations. And at the end of the training, over 98% of training participants reported that they were somewhat or very satisfied with the overall content of the training, and somewhat or strongly agreed that the topics addressed were important and relevant to their work and would recommend this training to others. Next slide. After the training, as I mentioned, we did participant surveys at 3 months, and interviews with program management at around 6 or 7 months post-training. And this has been conducted to date in DRC, Uganda, and Bangladesh. And in the 3-month survey, 94% of survey respondents strongly agreed or agreed with the statement. As a result of this workshop, the quality of my work in the last 3 months has improved. And 98% strongly agreed or agreed that as a result of this workshop, I'm confident in my ability to train others on the concepts covered in Make Me a Change Agent. Next slide. So while 98% strongly agreed or agreed with the statement that they're confident in their ability to train others on the concepts, we found that the number of people at 3 months who had trained others really varied by training cohort. So there was 25% to 100% of participants, depending on the training cohort, that reported training others on Make Me a Change Agent lessons in the last 3 months. And there were really different approaches taken by different partners for this training. So for example, in follow-up interviews with management in Bangladesh, we learned that one of the partners had integrated priority Make Me a Change Agent content, such as how to facilitate social and behavior change, using effective communication, empathy, listening, and questioning skills into existing training curricula, rather than cascading Make Me a Change Agent as a standalone training. And they had targeted a wide range of audiences with these techniques, including local agriculture service providers, water entrepreneurs, field facilitators, skilled birth attendants, a wide range of groups. And so this is a great example to share with others. Sometimes, it can be overwhelming to think like, oh, now that I've been trained, I have to find the budget, the time, I have to bring everyone together for a 5-day training. But no, these skills and the way the lessons are built is that you can take content and really build it into your existing trainings. It can be built into monthly meetings that you already have with staff. It doesn't have to all be delivered as a formal, 5-day standalone training. In Uganda, one partner taught the training to others who did not receive the training. And they, for example, such as negotiate behavior change, and they also added other lessons into planned wash trainings and are trying to see how they can incorporate these concepts into their sanitation marketing activities as well. In DRC, one partner developed MMCA training plans for each of the different purposes of their project and contextualized the content based on staff needs for each sector. So this is just to say, you can take a change agent and you can mix and match different lessons and really be responsive to the needs of your project. And so, next slide. So as I mentioned, these follow-up surveys and interviews were really helpful for us to modify, revise, and finalize the training manual, but also to think about, where do we go from here and how can we provide support? And I just wanted to share a quote from one of the managers in DRC that what really struck me or struck him about that training was that participatory approach, something that was totally different. When you have field staff that are not trained and field staff that are trained, you can compare the way that they work. You see how they are working with local stakeholders and using these participatory techniques. And so these participatory techniques are covered, there's a specific lesson on facilitation techniques and participatory techniques. But what we also hear from participants is that throughout the training, it really takes an adult approach to education that is based on adult education, and that we can see, the facilitators modeling these participatory techniques throughout the training, and that's how the lessons have been built. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Miraz, who is, as a co-facilitator and also as a manager in Bangladesh, will share a bit more about his perspective on Make Me a Change Agent.
Hi everyone, thanks Nicole. So hi, I'm Miraz Rahman and I work with HKI at its Bangladesh office at its Sapling project as the head of collaboration, learning and adaptation. I was first trained on MMCA by Croatian Ideal back in August 2019, and since then I have cascaded down with 200 of our staff members, either on individual lessons or the entire Making a Change Agent training guideline. So what's actually strike me most, and what I find most distinct about this SBCC manual, that like out of all the social behavioral change communication manual I have ever came across or used, it's very well organized and the lessons are very well laid out. And the Make Me a Change Agent guideline also is based on the adult learning principle. It's very well designed. And the other distinct feature of this training guide, it contains plethora of examples, contains realistic role plays, stories, activities for each lessons, and all the steps associated with each lesson. So it actually provides the opportunity for the participants in the training to practice those skill sets and connect to the content more closely. So although this training guide is tailored to WASH agriculture livelihood and includes all the examples, role plays, stories, and behaviors and practices that are primarily from these sectors. But for me, I think anyone who work in social behavioral change can actually use it. And because it talks about all the necessary skill sets that are prerequisite and relevant for any development worker working in any sectors to become a more effective agent of behavior change. And one particular thing that I trained our team containing all the frontline staffs, our technical team on agriculture, our maternal child neonatal advisors, and the management level. And when I see that one of the training content, which was the effective feedback, that was really helpful because it actually changed the entire feedback mechanism for our organization after our staff received this training. So I will hand it over to Abby. Thank you.
Thanks, Miraz. Thanks so much for sharing your perspective on the guide and how you've used it and been able to train others. I think it's great for other participants to hear how you can be trained in kind of the full guide, but then take bits and pieces to train others, and you know which modules seem to have really been useful for your team. Okay, so now we're about halfway through the webinar, and I don't know about you guys, but I am sitting through so many webinars, Zoom calls, meetings these days. So I want to do just a quick stretch break. So Julia, if you can go to the next slide. And this is the coronavirus stretch break sheet. So there's only a couple of us on videos. I won't make the rest of you get on video, but I do encourage you to at your seat or to stand up to just follow some of these descriptions that are on the sheet here. So the social distance palm, if we stick both of our hands out, it's about our 2 meters distance that we're supposed to be from people. Or if we're coughing, we're supposed to cough into our elbows. We want to make sure we're doing that. Maybe we're passing the toilet paper to our family members. And then lastly, raising our hands up. Hopefully it'll all be over soon. We can all be in person together and not behind our computers for the foreseeable future. So thank you. Hopefully it wasn't just Nicole and I doing that. The rest of you took a second to breathe and move your arms a little bit before we get into our next section. Next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to take just a few minutes to introduce what is in the guide, just so that when you leave here, if you've never experienced Make Me a Change Agent or looked or opened the guide before, you'll have a sense of what's in there when you leave here. And so it's written as a facilitator manual, as Nicole's been mentioning. You go to the next slide, Julia. And it's broken into different lessons. So we have lesson 1 through 9 which are kind of the core or foundational lessons that staff or volunteers may need if they're engaging with community members as behavior change agents. And so these are around effective communication, facilitation, negotiating for behavior change, as well as around storytelling, guided testimonials, and learning through cross-site visits. Next slide. And then we have lessons 10 through 14B that we've called advanced lessons because it might not be relevant for all program teams to really look into or learn all of these different lessons. So the introduction to social and behavior change, which provides kind of a theoretical overview and examples around different SBC approaches. We also have lessons around gender and gender bias or shared household roles and responsibilities. And then the 2 lessons on QIVCs or quality improvement and verification checklists that Nicole was talking about earlier. And some of these lessons may not be advanced for your participants, whomever you're saying needs the training around this. It could be that these lessons are perfectly appropriate. So we call them advanced just because they may not be relevant for all community-based volunteers or frontline workers. But the guide is very modular so that programs can pick and choose which ones are most relevant. Next slide. And so each lesson is designed the same way, and the original guide was outlined in the same way. So if you're using either one, this might look familiar to you. We have the achievement-based objectives on the first page of every lesson, and that shows what the participants should learn by the end of the lesson. We also have the duration, how long it'll take, and what materials the facilitator would need in preparation for that lesson. Next slide. Under that, we have details on why this lesson is important. So why is this particular skill important for behavior change agents to learn and know and apply in their work? Some more advanced preparation, making the different flip charts, collecting the different materials, so that when we get to the task or the actual activities, the facilitator is ready to go and has all the materials that they need. So the task section is really broken down into short bits of time to say, okay, here are the different activities that will take place during this lesson, and here's how much time each one is expected to take. Next slide. And then at the end of each lesson, we have the handouts, and we've done this to follow how the original guide also laid out each lesson. This way they're all collated at the end and so are easy to reference and find. As you're reading through the lesson, you'll see references to different handouts, and they're all put together at the end so you can print them out or reference them more easily during the training. And so as mentioned by Miraz, Nicole, there are various ways to use the guide. You don't have to go through the whole thing in one sit-down 5-day training with staff or volunteers. You can break it into different sections to weave in different activities or different lessons into monthly meetings, quarterly meetings. It really depends on your program design and what's most relevant for the audience that you're engaging in the Make Me a Change Agent. So with that, I'll pass it back to Miraz, who's going to take us into the negotiated behavior change lesson. Thanks.
Thanks again, Evie. So now we are going to dig a little deeper into one of the lessons that's included into the Make Me a Change Agent guideline titled Negotiated Behavior Change. And it's on the page 46 if anyone of you have that open. So along with the effective facilitation, communication, and the other facilitation skills, negotiation is another fundamental core skill that our behavior change agents need as they work with the community members and they work for facilitating the behavior change. So for the livelihood and WASH sectors, so this skills help the behavior change agents work with program participants, understanding their barriers to adopting new practices and find solutions together. And in the next few minutes, we are going to delve into more detail about what's ideal behavior and what's the next best behavior, and also the step of negotiation that are all included into this chapter before we get into the breakout group sessions and discuss how we are applying those techniques in our programming. So all the work that we do, we all have a program specific set of ideal behaviors or essential actions that we want to promote with our work with our behavior change agents. And so our behavior change agents who work at the field level are always well informed about these ideal behaviors that they want to promote. And some of the examples of ideal behaviors, if I have to talk sector specifically in terms of water detection and hygiene, can be use of sanitary latrine or proper hand washing with soap and water. If we go to agriculture, and so we want our targeted audience to use locally adapted quality seed varieties. We want them to use organic fertilizers and use biopesticide. But in reality, often we find that it's not possible that or easy for our targeted audience or the people we work with to adopt new behaviors. So it can happen for any number of reasons, and it's important for our staff not to make assumption what those reasons are. And for example, sometimes it's really difficult to see long-term benefits due to some short-term costs. There are competing priorities in terms of time, space, and financial resources for the people we work with. There can be the intra-household decision-making dynamics that the group we are working for, especially me, we are working predominantly with the female participants, but the decision might not be on their hand. There can be also socio-cultural taboos and etc. So it's not always the lack of information or knowledge, but all the factors that I just mentioned limits people's ability to adopt new behaviors. So a behavior change agent, it's essential that they work with the participants and together they identify the barriers through effective listening and work together to discover various options that might be realistic and appropriate for the participant to adopt, and which we can call the next best behavior. Thank you. Next slide, please. So as you can see, we're going to discuss two examples in a greater details. And so in terms of ideal behaviors and what can be the next best behaviors. So as mentioned before, that we have a set of ideal behaviors that we promote in our program in terms of, for example, wash programming. This may be washing hands with soap and running water. And for agriculture, it may be storing grains in a hermetically sealed bag or container. Maybe a program encourages its participant in adopting a hermetically sealed bag, such as the pig's bag as the picture shows, to reduce pest damage. So in this example, what can be the best behaviors? So considering the present context, the global context of the COVID pandemic, it's more important and relevant than ever that people wash their hands with soap as many times as possible for at least 20 seconds. So there can be many barriers, especially the work I have done. This is water scarce areas, and there are people who really do not have access to soap or do not have the money to buy it. So one alternative way can be using soapy water instead of soap. So that can be next best behavior. And another example, using hermetically sealed bag. If you see right now that most of our value chains are disrupted, the markets are closed, so maybe people do not have the opportunity to collect those or do not have the money to adopt those. So instead, what as a next best behavior, it can happen that they just use a airtight container to seal their grains, or if they're using woven bag, they can use like more than 2-3 bags so that they can control the pest infestation, and it's very valid. It's really valid considering the context now during COVID. They might need to save their grains for a longer period so that when everything goes back to normal, they can sell it later on. Next slide, please. So in the guideline, there are many advantages of negotiation that has been discussed. So I will not go through each one of these. So I'm just going to talk about two of the things that I find really interesting and most fascinating and important. First one is building trust. So trust building is really, really essential because it creates that safe space between the BCA and community members and give them the opportunity for dialogue. And within that safe space, the participants are more open for discussion and expressing their worries, concerns, their barriers, which ultimately gonna help the BCA or behavior change agent to figure out the barriers and walk through the alternative solutions with the participants. And the other interesting advantage of negotiation, which I really find fascinating, is that all of our program-specific ideal behaviors, all those are scientifically grounded. And in reality, in the communities we work for, we find that they have their own cultural social norms, they have their own practices, they have their own values and needs. And often, like, our expectation or the behavior that we are promoting and the community's need or what they value, they often doesn't match. So there is a gap that needs to be bridged. And through the process, through the skill of negotiation, behavior change agent can bridge those gaps and pave the path for the negotiated behavior and the behavior that we are promoting. So the work of the negotiated behavior change agent or behavior change agent is actually effectively listening to the participants with respect, building trust, and working together with the participants on next best actions based on the barriers participants stated they are facing. It's not about telling people what they should do. It's about walking them through the barriers and finding alternative solutions together. Next slide, please. So there are different steps of negotiated behavior change that I'm not going to go through. You will find it on page 68. There are 8 steps. These are all systematic way to negotiate a behavior change. So this process might be different depending on what you want to change and who you want to change with or who you're talking to. But this 8 steps remain unchanged. You will find more details into the guideline. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, so in summary, like, negotiated behavior change it's about working with the participants. It's about working with them and understanding their current behaviors and what are the barriers that participants are facing for while they try to adopt an ideal behavior, and talk to them, work with them to identify and negotiate so that they can try the next best behavior that are feasible for them. And with all that, we need to build trust with the participants and getting to know them, their motivation and the barriers they're facing. So thank you. Thanks to you. Thanks, Abby.
Thanks, Faraz. A great overview of the negotiated behavior change lesson. And as he mentioned, there's more details on the steps of negotiation, there's role plays, and a lot more information in the guide. So please check out lesson 5 after the webinar to learn more about that lesson. Thanks so much for all the great questions that are coming in through the chat box. We really appreciate the dialogue that's happening there. Feel free to respond to each other as well. So the next part of our webinar, Julia, next slide, please, is that we are headed into breakout groups. And the groups will be of about 10 to 15 of you in each group, and it will be self-facilitated. So we ask that when you get into the room, you elect one person who will be the note taker. So this requires unmuting your mic, turning on your video if you feel comfortable and have the bandwidth to do so. And we'll have a dialogue around 3 different discussion points that I'll show you in just a second. But as I mentioned, when you get into the breakout groups, you'll have one person who's going to be filling out this Google form. So Nicole's going to post into the chat box the link to the form, as well as the discussion questions, so that when you get into your breakout group, you already have those. And just one of you, we ask that as your discussion goes on, you're taking a few notes in the form, and then when we're coming back from breakout groups, you hit submit so that it comes through to Scale and ProWash, and we can see some of the key discussion points that took place throughout the different breakout groups. The presenters will be kind of jumping into different groups throughout, and so we'll be there to help guide the discussion or to chime in as needed. But we're hoping that the questions are ones that you can all kind of relate to and contribute to during this time. And a few technical points when you get to the breakout. If you have any issues, you can hit a little question mark at the bottom of your screen, and that will alert Julia Randall, who can come help you figure out any technical issues. There will be a corner in the top of the breakout room that will be counting down the amount of time you have. So we have about 15 minutes for discussion, and then we'll bring you all back together in the main room. And so Nicole's going to post in the form and the 3 questions that will be discussed. Julia, next slide. And so the questions here are, have you used negotiation for behavior change? How can project staff and volunteers use the Make Me a Change Agent skills during COVID-19? And then one area of your project where you feel that strengthened negotiation or communication skills would help. And so I don't see any questions coming into the chat box, so I'm gonna hope that was clear enough, and we'll go out into breakout rooms and then come back in 15 minutes for wrap up. Great, I think that's most participants back from the breakout rooms, and great to see some videos, to see some of your faces from the breakout rooms. And I was only able to join little bits of a few different conversations. So encourage you, if there's something really interesting from your discussion that you want to type in the chat box, we do have the Google Forms that we'll be looking through after the webinar, and can share any key points out after the webinar. But just a few things that I heard during the discussion is around, the first question on how have you used negotiation for behavior change, people talking about using it with hygiene promotion, so training using community health clubs, care groups, and negotiation in groups, and using that to influence via the care group lessons. I think for there's also discussion around, hygiene or improved latrine construction, and using negotiation for behavior change around adoption of that, around composting. So there's a ton of different sectors that join the discussion today to really provide that rich exchange and different examples. Then people got into talking about COVID-19 specific usage of these different skills. People talked about working remotely and adapting radio and SMS platforms, and then following up with phone calls. We did hear in the last group I was in, the challenge when there aren't a number of phones and there isn't data or internet accessibility. And so what are kind of the options around that? So thinking about potential radio, or if small groups are still able to meet, how you can use kind of a network of behavior change agents just to still continue promoting some of those ideal and next best behaviors with participants. And just to note that, related to that question, we've dropped in the chat box the COVID-19 tip sheet that Scale and ProWash put together to answer this question in some ways, how can we still use the Make Me a Change Agent skill set during COVID-19 and what adaptations might look like. And then this last question on one area of your project where you feel that strengthened negotiation or communication skills would help. There's a discussion around livestock vaccines and how, the men in the households are more likely to get their cattle vaccinated, but the women who have smaller ruminants may not be as likely. And so using the kind of steps of negotiation might be a good approach around that. Or negotiating with farmers to use fodder for their animals, or related to WASH and livelihoods, encouraging communities to adopt savings and taking of loans using the VSL, the Village Savings and Loan methodology. You could use some of the negotiation and communication skills during that. So thanks so much to all of you for participating in that. It's always great to be able to connect with other colleagues and hear from people from all different regions of the world on our call today. Next slide, Julia. So just in our final minutes, we wanted to make sure that all of you know, leaving the webinar, how you can continue engaging with Scale and Pro WASH and with Make Me a Change Agent going forward. So if you are funded by the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, it's Scale and Pro WASH can provide trainings, review Make Me a Change Agent rollout plans if you're planning to train others, you can review the QIVCs that your team is planning to use, and provide kind of that technical support to BHA partners. For both BHA and non-BHA funded partners, we have the training materials, the technical tools that are available to anyone. And we can also engage in capturing the learnings coming out of your program around the usage of Make Me a Change Agent. So maybe you're applying it with the WASH or agriculture sectors with your frontline workers in those areas. And you're learning something really great about the facilitation, negotiation, et cetera. It would be great for us to learn from that as well. So we're going to put in the chat box in just a minute a form where you can kind of express your interest in engaging further with us going forward. For Scale and Pro WASH, we are working on the Amharic and the French versions of the guide. Those will be ready in a few weeks. We'll follow up after the webinar with a recording and links to the MMCA resources. And like I said, that short form to express further engagement. And then we're also looking at an e-learning option for MMCA. As we were doing a number of our follow-up interviews and surveys with participants, there was the expression of interest to do refreshers or have some way to continue learning over time. So that, coupled with the current COVID-19 context, recognizing that we need to make these resources available more broadly, and an e-learning or kind of remote learning option may be a good route there. So that's still under discussion, but it would be great to hear if you're interested in that in the survey following the webinar. Next slide. And we can't leave without thanking our amazing co-facilitators over the last year and a half. You got to hear from Miraz today, but we also worked with a number of other great folks in Bangladesh, Ethiopia, the DRC, and Uganda. So if your program or team is interested in training around MMCA or technical support around that, these are great resources, and yeah, just wanted to make sure that we adequately thank them. The trainings were so much richer and more contextually appropriate because of their partnership in the rolling out of the trainings. Next slide. And so just before we end, we have two quick polls. One is just how likely are you to use the Make Me a Change Agent training manual in the next 6 months? It's good to see that there's a number of you who are very likely or likely. We'll give it just another 20 seconds or so to see if we can get a few more responses. Great, thank you. And then our next question. Great. So yeah, it seems like 39% are likely or very likely, which is great to see. And then the next one is, how likely are you to share the MMCA training guide with a colleague? Share it with someone else after coming through this webinar. Great, thank you. And the results from that, we can see that about 65% are very likely, and then the rest are likely to share with a colleague, which is great. Thanks so much for participating in that. And then just in closing, just want to thank all of you for joining us today. And then also give a huge thank you to our co-facilitators and also our ideal colleagues, Julia, Kim, Maya, Anusha, Rebecca. There's so many people who helped make this webinar possible and helped make Me a Change Agent materials get to where they are today. And so we thank them so much, and also all the participants who joined our trainings the last year and a half and gave us great feedback to work from to get the product where it is today. So with that, let's say thank you and enjoy the rest of your day. We hope to stay in touch.